tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I'm a little scattered today anyway. The big stirring up of a weekend up in the snow up near Lake Tahoe with lots of kids and people around, and so I'm still a little spun on work and activity and things. So all of that spinning around, but it's a delight to come and sit. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this emptiness piece. Like I said, we've been edging toward it this past bunch of weeks, and then a question came in about emptiness in a way that makes sense given how we've been moving toward it. And that moving toward, partly has to do with this discussion around the Buddha's insight into his past lives, and the way that there's this way of understanding liberation in this system where attention becomes strong through training and then is directed to remembering the past, really directed toward understanding, where have I been? What have my homes been? What has been my experience? And really understanding how that experience has flowed through a kind of endless cycle of becoming, more and more different kinds of people, different kinds of beings. The classical explanation of this is through many rebirths. But you can also understand it psychologically through many, many states of mind, states of being, places we've lived on the planet. And that when the Buddha then turns to look at others, he sees this same process playing out for other people, other beings, human, animal, spirit, otherwise. And investigates by observing very closely how it happens, like how people are reborn, how people go from one state of being to another, one mind state to another, and asks how this happens. Like, what's the mechanism for why some folks have a path that progresses toward more comfort. Some folks have a path that progresses toward more discomfort, and really pins it in a way on the ethical nature of our actions, that the actions that we do that cause harm or that cause help and serve ourselves and others, that those things really determine our state of mind in the next moments and in the next years and the next lifetimes even. And that having seen that, he understands this piece about cause and effect, about what conditions what, and how actions lead to results all the time. That's one layer of the story, and it points to this basic teaching that comes out in the Four Noble Truths around how, grasping at things being a certain way leads to distress and anxiety and stress and suffering. But it has other implications, and one of those implications comes from this insight into conditionality, into how things come to be the way they are, and that everything comes to be the way it is because of the many, many, many conditions that went into its arising. So my experience of this moment is conditioned by, a vast web of previous choices that beings have made, including all of the choices that led to the, creation of the objects around me, including everything that grew in the wild environment, everything that was crafted in the human environment, everything that has come to me in the form of ideas and language and concepts. All of these conditions and then my personal conditions, my family conditions, my social conditions, the, all the web of traumas and privileges and you know, uh, all the seeds that have come to fruition in this moment. The Buddha sees all of this, says that our experience of this moment is created by all of these conditions that have happened in the past, including very centrally our own actions. And it's not that my actions created my material existence entirely, or hardly at all in a certain way. What my actions created really was the seed of my mind state in this moment. So whether I'm rich or poor depends on a lot of conditions, some of which were my actions in the past and some of which were others people's actions and choices. But my mind state in this moment is very heavily determined by my own wholesome or unwholesome, ethical or unethical, skillful or unskillful actions in the past, choices that I've made. This is the underlying mechanism of why the Buddha doesn't just come forward with a system of faith or a philosophical system about the nature of the universe, but really comes forward with a pragmatic discipline. It says, well, if choices are the thing that determines your mind state, which is really how you are in the future, then that's something that you can train, and you can do something about that, and you can work on that, and you have a lever to change your experience. And without everything being conditional, right, based in conditions, it would be a much more deterministic universe, and there were philosophers and spiritual teachers of the Buddha's time who taught that our actions are meaningless and don't have anything to do with our future. And people are miserable for as long as they're miserable, and then when they're done, and you can't do anything about that. They would teach a completely deterministic philosophy that our actions really don't matter, that there's no such thing as good and bad actions. And the Buddha not only said that this was wrong view, but he actually categorically criticized these teachers and said, like, this teacher is a fool who teaches this, who causes a lot of harm in the world. Like, the Buddha was very clear that this is not only a wrong view, but it's a very harmful view, that our actions have no effect, right? That what we do doesn't matter. So he taught very clearly that what we do matters. But as the teachings developed, there are some implications in this realization that he had. This was really the realization that unfolded as his liberation, feeling into past and future and rebirths and how actions condition states. The implications of this got fleshed out, and one of those implications is the teaching on what's called emptiness. And the way that you can think about this is that emptiness and conditionality is the cause and effect process. Emptiness and conditionality completely depend on each other, can't exist without each other. And in a simple way, you can think of it like if things, meaning experiences, events, people, ideas, objects, entities, if any of these things were not empty, meaning if they were fixed or solid or permanent in a way, they would be unchangeable. And something that's unchangeable can't be liberated, and actually can't be affected by our actions at all. And so for our actions to be meaningful, everything in the world has to be malleable, has to be conditioned, has to be available to be changed, including ourselves. Right? If you had a set, solid identity forever, that identity would have to have certain characteristics in order to be identified. I would have to be the one who is like this. But if I'm the one who is like this, how can the one who is like this change and be a different way, have different characteristics? That would be impossible. For me to be able to change and therefore be liberated, I have to not have any fixed characteristics. I have to be a conditioned phenomenon. And so emptiness is the implication of conditionality. Everything is interconnected and conditioned, therefore everything is empty. If things were not empty, they could not be conditioned. Right? So emptiness first appears in the Buddha's teachings as a meditation. And if you want to read the text on this, there's maybe the core text on this is in the middle-length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 121, the shorter discourse on emptiness. And in it, the Buddha gives a really simple, in a way, meditation, and in a way, a very simple concept. And he says, and this was the basis of the meditation we did tonight, he says, look around you. He's talking to his monastics, monks and nuns. They're in the Dharma hall, in the monastery known as the Stilt Longhouse of Migara's mother. So they're in a long hall, and he says, look around you. This Stilt Longhouse doesn't have any horses in it, right? No, he says no horses, no elephants. And presumably the monastics are like, yeah, what are you getting at? And he says, the longhouse is empty of horses. They're like, yeah. He said, and he says, so just so, your meditation can include that which is here, which is that this is a hall full of monastics. And it's not a hall with elephants and horses. Emptiness, as one of you said in our check-in, emptiness means empty of something. So that's the clear original definition. Emptiness means empty of something. So then the Buddha goes on and he says, so here's a meditation. When you go out into the wilderness to meditate, you let the perception of wilderness be in the foreground of your awareness. So you're aware of it. I'm in the wilderness. And when you're in the wilderness, you're aware that you're not in the town. So all of the stuff of the town, all of the people and the busyness and the vehicles and the animals and the buildings and all of that drama of the city, the town, it's not here when you're in the wilderness. Therefore, you can rest into a meditation of wilderness that is empty of town. It's empty of what's not here. What's not here, you don't have to worry about. And so he specifically says, therefore, the stress or worry or anxiety based on the perception of town is not present here. Right? So here's the principle, right? If I'm connecting in my meditation with what's here and now, like I'm here in this room, this is my office room in my house. I know what's here. We did the meditation, who's here in your space. At the moment, I'm the only one here in the room. So I know that other people are not here, right? And so the stress or anxiety based in the perception of other people, or horses or elephants, which are also not here, is absent, right? You don't have to, it's not that you automatically don't stress about things. Like we know that stress is often a function of just thought. Like I could stress about other people, even though they're not here. That's easy enough to do it all the time. But what the Buddha's pointing to is subtler, which is that when those other people or elephants or horses or whatever are here, there's a certain amount of energy, we can say, that goes to perceiving them, tracking them, right? Knowing what they're doing. And that pull on my attention is itself stressful. It is itself a form of dukkha, right? Which doesn't mean it's bad in any way. It could be quite lovely. It could be my sweetheart, meditating here with me. Not a problem, right? But it still could be a pull on my attention in that way. So likewise, I'm out here in the hills of Western Sonoma County. It's quite peaceful and quiet out here. But I spent 25 years in the middle of San Francisco and Oakland, big cities, where the perception of city was quite prominent for me. Being out here, this room, my little office room here, is empty of the perception of city. And so I loved living in San Francisco. But right now, the text says stress, but we could also just say impact. The particular impact of the perception of city is not here with me. And so I can perceive this place as being relatively more peaceful than that, simply because that stimulation is not present. And so emptiness, in a way, begins not as a frightening ontological concept of like everything is, ephemeral and, lacks a true nature. It'll get there philosophically soon enough. But it starts off actually as this very simple, and I think, really tranquility-oriented or peacefulness-oriented approach toward really understanding that when you're in a peaceful place, you're free from the impingement of that which is less peaceful. And it's very much about this kind of peace or tranquility aspect, because what the Buddha does in this text, again, this is the shorter discourse on emptiness, Majjhima 121. What he does is he says, so you go to the wilderness is in your perception, and you notice that you are free from the stress based on the perception of the city that you're not in. Right? So you're not perceiving the city, therefore you're not subject to the stress of that perception or the impact of that perception, and you rest just into the perception of wilderness. But then you want to go further. And because you notice that the wilderness is full of details and variation. There's hills and valleys and trees and grasses and open spaces and all the different things. So your attention is occupied by diversity, by the whole range of things, right? That's a lot of sensory input. And so to go subtler and to go toward a more spacious or more still, more tranquil meditation. And again, this is a meditation. This isn't how we walk through the world. This is a particular meditation aiming toward a deep tranquility. You begin to ignore the features of wilderness around you, and instead you hook into the fact that all of it manifests the quality of the earth element. Right? So you generalize. You say all of these hills and valleys and trees and grasses and birds and shrubs and light and all the things, they all share the nature of earth. So you kind of drop down a level from the perception of diversity, all of that different impact, down to just the perception earth. Right? And so you're going from a busier level of perception to a less busy one, because there's one thing happening here, which is earthiness. So you perceive earth. And you can enter absorption, right, based on the elements. So you could get very, very still, very concentrated, very steady on this perception of earth. After earth and the contact with the elements, right, then the sequence goes toward what's called the immaterial planes or states or bases of attention. And this is a standard sequence that is often follows the sequence of the jhanas, but you can enter it by itself, as this meditation does. You go from the perception of wilderness, which is empty of town, to the perception of earth, which in a way is empty of wilderness, because you're not paying attention to that anymore. from earth, you can drop the perception earth, which still has a kind of impingement in it. Earth has qualities of hardness and solidity and forms to see. And there's a sensory impact or a kind of stress in perceiving that. It's very subtle. There's a kind of stress in perceiving earthiness. So then you can shift to that, to just the perception of infinite space. So the earthiness or the elementalness can be let go of, and you can drop into an even simpler, vast, very singular quality of just space. And the immaterial attainments are this sequence of increasingly subtle, infinite perceptions. So they're very deep, they're very concentrated, they are formless, so they are, you could say, disembodied in a certain way, which just means you're not paying attention to the body anymore. They're very, very concentrated, so they're subtle. They're quite subtle states, and the sequence goes: the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, and the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And you get from each one to the next by letting go of a certain gross vibration aspect and to something subtler. So like if you rest in the base of infinite space, you've let go of attending to all the diversity of forms, and there's just the sense that all of these forms fill out a sense of space, and that space goes on forever, right? That's the universe. So you rest in the sense of the universe being infinite and full of stuff. But if you want to go subtler than that, you could notice that if you're aware or conscious of the universe in its vastness, its infinite spaceness, the consciousness of that is one step further back, even from the perception of forms. So you can let go of the perception of infinite space and rest into to infinite consciousness. Because if you're conscious of infinite space, consciousness must also be infinite. So you let go of space, and then there's just consciousness. But then if you're conscious of infinite consciousness, whatever that means, how are you conscious of it, right? You're aware that consciousness is infinite. But you've already let go of the perception of infinite space. Well, what's left? There's actually nothing there. So then the next base is that you let go of the concept consciousness, and then there's just the base of nothingness. I'm going to do these briefly because if you know them, you know them, and if you don't, it'll send you off the wrong direction. So I'll just mention them because that's where this goes. From attending to nothingness, the perception there is nothing, then one could let go even of that which is a concept. How do you perceive nothing? I don't even know. Therefore, the next state is neither perception nor non-perception, which is such a profoundly subtle state, really empty of meaning of any kind, that you're almost not sure if you're perceiving anymore, but you are. So it's neither perception nor non-perception. And that's the second to last step in this meditation. The last one is called, and this one is not part of the standard sequence. This one is special to the meditation on emptiness, and it's called the signless immersion of the heart. So letting go of neither perception nor non-perception, one rests in a meditation called the signless immersion of the heart. So we're way out in the deep end here. So hang out with me for a moment, and we're going to come back to solid ground in just a second. Signless, for anyone who has studied modern semiotics, right? A sign is like the name of a thing, or the pointer toward a thing, or the way that a thing is recognized. So there's a thing that happens in perception where when I recognize something happens, right? And it could be a word or an image or a mark or just the feeling of recognition. All of that is the sign. There's a sign. And so what would it mean for a meditation to be signless? One of the implications here is that all of the names for things and the meanings we ascribe to things have fallen away. And actually in the sequence of this meditation, they fell away all the way back at the earth element, right? You were already letting go of like, that's a tree, that's a hill, that's a badger. And you're just like, nah, it's all the earth element. So the whole thing is actually a process of temporarily setting aside the words and stories and meditations and like meaning levels that we have for things, right? We're not saying that those things are not what their name is. I'm not saying that's not a badger, not a tree, not a hill. I'm saying in order to understand something deeper about who I am in the world and what we're doing here, I'm going to do this temporary strange trance where I let everything just be in the simplest way. Like all of this is just earth. All of this is just resting in space, manifesting the nature of space. And all of this space is just conscious. And there's actually nothing solid here at all. And even perception is just names for things. And so in the end, there's a kind of, this is the place where words fall away, signless, right? But it has often, you get the sense that it has the feeling of vastness, of all inclusivity, of, not falling into specificity or difference. So this is the meditation on emptiness. And the Buddha says that he rests in this a lot. This is one of his favorite hangouts, and from this beginning, so if we rewind back through that extremely rarefied sequence, what we get from the very beginning of this meditation is the sense that the thing that is so stressful for us, the thing that is dukkha, that is unsatisfying, that is distressing, that is challenging, is this way that the heart grabs onto things being a certain way, being the way we want, being not the way we want, getting what we want, not getting what we wanted, and that all of those emotional constrictions depend on stories and ideas about what things mean that are really quite flimsy. If I get this promotion, it will mean that I'm a good worker or a good person or a good human being, or I'm successful and I want to be that. Like, it's fine to want to to do well or to get promoted or whatever, to get rich or to have a wonderful partner, or what all the things you want. You probably want good things, but the stories of what we want are created out of all of these fixed meanings. If this happens, it means that. If I get this experience, it means that. I want this experience because I want to feel a certain way. What's up with that? And at the heart of all of these stories and all of this distress about what I want, what I'm getting, what I'm not getting, is, are some of the most fixed and difficult stories of all of them, which is the who am I story, right? Like, why does it matter for me to feel like a success? It partly matters because I have this, self that I carry around, and it has dreams and ideas and responsibilities. And if I don't get it, I'll feel bad, or other people will be disappointed in me, or I'll be disappointed in me, or I won't make enough money and things will get bad for my situation. Like, whatever the story, all of that's real. All of that can be meaningful and can be important. And we can still recognize that it's empty. Because the implication of this sequence that the Buddha goes through, right? Increasing layers of generalization and subtlety and vastness is not just that this room is empty of horses and elephants. The room is empty of meaning and permanent identity. So, empty of what? It's empty of anything that's not actually there. And what's not here is if I want to feel at peace, what's not here is a story about what this means. So like I could take this room. I'm in this lovely office in my house. It's the nicest office I've ever had. I love my little house right now. And so I could totally tell you a story about this room and the pleasures that it gives me and the way that I feel like I've finally achieved a tiny bit of success by having a room like this. But if I connect with that, if I sit in this room and I connect with that, it's generally positive, actually. Like I'm choosing an example that's not painful, right? It's generally pleasurable for me to connect with that. But when I do that, what I feel partly is that story, which has all these layers of like who I am and the work that I've chosen and the choices that I've made and all the things. It has stuff in it about my marriage and my family and my race and my culture and my class and it goes from systemic all the way down to very personal, how I was raised, attachment, all the things. I could tell that whole story. When I tune into that story being present in the room, there's a certain, again, we don't have to say stress, but we could say impact. There's an impact that story has on my psyche when I attend to it. That story is not inherent in the room. When we first moved into this house, we thought this room was going to be our kids' bedroom. And then we thought it was going to be our bedroom. And finally, 3 room shuffles around, we realized that the kids' bedroom was down there and our bedroom was over there and I was here. And I was like, aha, I've landed. And that's great. But when this was my kids' room, it didn't have any of those stories. It had a whole different story, right? It had a whole story of like, how exciting, I'm giving my kid one of the nicest rooms in the house. And then I was like, why am I giving my kid the nicest room in the house? I want the nicest room in the house, All of those stories are conditioned, of course, right? None of them are embedded in the walls and the floor. None of them are the nature of the space. And if I do the meditation of letting go of obsessing about that, including obsessing about the self that feels these things about this place, I can drop into a different layer of my own presence. And there's a layer of my own presence where that story is not the most important thing happening, right? That story is still true, but I could drop into the perception, for instance, as I do when I settle with the breath, or I light the candles in the morning, and this room becomes, a morning practice space, and it's a little shrine. And I'm not thinking about it being my office or the nicest room or that it's wonderful to have it at all. I'm really just doing morning chanting and sitting and seeing the candlelight flicker, and the room means something different in that moment. In that moment, the room is empty of the story of what it means in this other way. Yeah? Right? It's empty of that which is not here in this moment. So if that's true about the room, here's the turn of the screw. It's true about you and me, ourselves. So if I tune into the identity story, right? Sean of this ancestry, born in this place, with this life story, with this name, with this family, all these things. There's that layer, and I can tune into that layer. And then I can drop, I want to say below, but I don't want to give even the sense of like better, worse, shallower, deeper. They're just different. But I can drop into a layer where that story of myself, I can see how conditioned it is, right? That story is based on things that other people chose, that I chose. That conditioned story doesn't define me. If it did, it wouldn't be changeable, but it keeps changing, And so to perceive myself in a different register, in a different way, allows me to recognize that that story of myself is empty. This is the basis of the insight into not self, anatta. That the thing that I perceive as myself is a meaning layer, it's a story, it's a narrative, it's conditioned, it's important in certain ways, in certain aspects of our world that are themselves conditioned. But you can do something else. You can tune into other aspects of your being. And when you do that, you can see that that story is empty, right? It's a mirage created by conditions. And part of what happens as the Buddha works through this sequence is, toward increasing subtlety, is that every layer is conditioned. That's the kicker here, is, it's turtles all the way down, right? You never reach a solid layer where you're like, this is my absolute true self. Everything else is untrue. The only thing you could find if you get to that solid layer would have to be a kind of infinite, all-encompassing monistic, meaning just one thing, sort of non-dual perception. And if you get to that layer, then sure, you could call it your true self, you could call it God, you could call it the infinite universe. And at that point, you're in the signless and it doesn't matter anymore, right? If there's not differentiation between things, you call it whatever you want. And so sure, call it God. But that's not your small self. The small self is conditioned. The individual is conditioned. All of the specific experiences are conditioned. So when in the Perfection of Wisdom texts, it says that, a bodhisattva is one who is not afraid when hearing the teaching on emptiness. I think that's a really perceptive and gorgeous teaching. It suggests that you can hear this teaching, that everything is radically conditioned and unfixed and not solid. And that, what does it mean to not be afraid of that? I think it means that there's enough wisdom or availability for wisdom in the heart that the proposal that the thing that you think you are and what you think the world is, that all of that is not so much not true or not what you think it is, but it's just not it's not the only story. It's probably not the most important story in a way. And it's a story that's causing you stress. So it might behoove us to drop that, to demote that story from its position of importance anyway. Again, it doesn't make it not true. It just makes it not the only thing happening. And then you can choose which channel you tune into. Sometimes it's really appropriate to tune into the self, ego-structured narrative channel. Other times it's really helpful to see that channel is actually empty, and that this space that you're in, or this body in this moment, can be empty of that narrative. So to finish for the moment, just the proposal that, again, this is not a way that we necessarily need to walk through life. The Buddha is describing very specifically a meditation, but that something really healthy happens when we can touch, even in a momentary, just reflective way, this thing that we might call the signless. That, the meanings we give to things are meanings that have been given, that are conditioned, but that freed from those meanings having to be permanent or solid or always true in the same way, is just is liberating, straight up. That the meanings of things change, the identities of things change. Nothing is one thing forever. Nothing is ever just one thing, and that's meant to be just a profound release of tension in the heart. All right, so pausing there. Thanks for riding that deep into the formless and hopefully back out.